applying for work. Like the pros and cons of disability, that was a whole hour. Accessibility, we just went off over that. Applying for work while disabled. When I started working again when I was disabled, the first thing I did was I had a job coach, right? Because the state supplied me with a job coach. I went to vocational rehabilitation, and one of the coach, she said, it's not about how good you are sometimes, it's about who you know. And if you know somebody at that place, then the likelihood is you'll get in a lot quicker, even if you're not that qualified, which is crazy beyond me. It messed me up in the head because I was like, what? And so when I went to apply for the job, in fact, it was the general manager that was interviewing me. And I said right out, yeah, I'm on dialysis 3 times a week. I'm disabled. I had to say that from the jump so that they won't go, oh, you didn't tell us this. You didn't tell us you didn't have this availability, blah, blah, blah. So I had to let it known, even though technically it's my business.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to let them know so that they can make accommodations schedule-wise for me. So sometimes the accommodations aren't necessarily physical. Sometimes the accommodations need to be circumstantial, but sometimes they need to be both. So it depends. And one of my coworkers is full-time in a wheelchair. And so he can't get out of that wheelchair. He can't walk on his own. And so, and then some people will think, well, he's in a wheelchair, so he's not standing up on his feet all day, so he doesn't need that many breaks. No, yes, he does, because his feet are literally these. And all that pushing, you get fatigued too. And so you also have to accommodate him too. And so it was a whole thing, and then on top of it, for me being, I have chronic fatigue, being a dialysis patient. So standing on your feet for 10, 12 hours a day, that's a lot, especially for somebody with chronic fatigue.
Yeah. The applying process also anymore uses these automatic technological systems that create a lot of work. So I am multiply disabled. It is not one disability, but it's multiple, and with that, one issue may present more at one time and another issue presents at another time. But with applications, it's like I get frustrated because I upload my resume and then it auto populates things and there's all kinds of gaps. And then I have to go in and fix all of those gaps. And, and even then there's also the valuation, the value of the lived experience that is often omitted from most application processes. So as a disabled person, if you haven't worked, you've had, you're currently, to me, you are working with RBN, with your podcast, with the structure you've added to your life, paid or unpaid, you are learning skills. These skills then apply. However, if the system is not designed to include the awareness of those skills, you are further marginalized because you're not even in the running for that job because your experience isn't understood through their lens. Again, this is similar to the situation I was just in. I wanted to go in under the higher position. There were 2 staff positions awarded to this Office of Disability Affairs. And I wanted to go in under the higher one, and I applied, and I actually managed to score well because I have the smarts of how to kind of comply with that system, which a lot of people don't have the time, energy, or anything else to do. So I scored highly, and I got into the interview for the top position, and I was one of the top 3 candidates. But I was opted to not be given the job because I didn't have codified and acceptable government experience. So that already, they offered me this appointment, the provisional appointment that they offered me. And when I applied for that, I actually barely was in the running for the position because I didn't spend a lot of time finessing my application, answering the questions in a way that I knew was directly going to answer their questions. And I was kind of fed up at that point. So but they also picked, I swear they picked the questions of my weak spots in order to qualify candidates for that position. Because at that point, they already had me working as an appointed person in that role. And they were seeing my work product, but they were also seeing the gaps of my skill sets, and things. So the application process, it's kind of, it's hard. It's toxic. It's no longer just a simple, somebody, you get into the role. And there's also complicitness within the systems. And I think this takes us back to what we need from our coworkers and what we need to help us in this process is we need everybody to be an ally. We need everybody to be actively advocating for rights of worker rights that include people with disabilities. And because people were like, oh yeah, well, I had to do a provisional appointment in a contract position, and I had to try 3 different departments before I actually got a full job. Why? They're in the job now. Why were they not given the job and educated, met where they were at to build them into that role when they knew they wanted them in that job to begin with, but they had to check all the boxes and cross all the T's and dot all the I's? So the complicitness with the systems that exist, and I realize some people don't have the capacity for that, and that's okay, but connect and collaborate and build these pathways when you have the energy to do it, because we need everybody to be pulling for everybody in that way,
And are we going to talk about people who may be neurodivergent, who can do the job, but they may be somebody who, are, disadvantaged in some ways as our society's condition. And so, but they can still do the job. It's like, but then we also want people to do multiple jobs, even though it's not in their job description. It's like, yeah, if I'm good at coding, don't ask me to do some physical labor on the side that you should hire somebody else to do,
Right.
because I can't do it. But, they want one size fits all, candidate.
Neurodivergence is interesting because I actually had to come face to face with acknowledging and identifying as such. Whereas through much of my life, I've not really, and I've stayed away from it. I would say I qualify as a neurodivergent adult because of my history with trauma, as well as the complex medical issues that I deal with that make my brain slightly different. I also had a brain injury from forced treatment at once upon a time that, caused harm that affects my memory, my recall, my attention. And then you put me in a stressful situation and I'm flighty as all get out. So I don't appear to be grounded where I am. And this was my first big organization job. So I had always been in a job that I could kind of control my environment. And in this situation, I had to go through the bureaucratic process to get adaptations to that environment. And that bureaucratic process was kind of a struggle to start with. So, and I think as we age and as capitalism gets worse, and, as we reach this point that we're kind of in now, more and more of us by stress alone have some of these categories of neurodivergence that we are all struggling with. So to make a more inclusive environment that addresses those needs from the start is better for everybody.
Travel is also another barrier as well. Traveling to and from work, this may be difficult for some of us because some of us do not have personal transportation. Some of us may need to use public transportation. One of the gripes that I have with the public transportation that I use is this is what's the name for it?
Paratransit.
Paratransit, yes. Yeah, so paratransit service that I have, thank you. Paratransit service that I use, you have to schedule it at a opportune time, because if you don't schedule, sometimes what they'll do is they may get you late to work because they're shared ride services. And the thing is that you left on time, you were on time for your ride, but then the ride ends up either being late or the ride ends up keeping you on while dropping and picking people up. And so therefore you end up being late for work, which also can count against you, even though it's not your fault. And so sometimes using paratransit services can also screw you over as a worker. And so it's either that or having to take the regular public transportation, but you also may have to go to bus stops that may be a distance away, which if you don't have services of an electric chair, or if your chair isn't fully charged, because
or if your community isn't wheelchair accessible because the sidewalks are in disrepair. Yeah. Or because there's a post in the middle of the sidewalk that, oh, they haven't gotten around to removing and replacing yet. You know, there's a lot of barriers. Yeah.
Or if you go to the bus stop, but you have a ways to go and it's raining, Florida, hello, that's where I'm at. And let's say hypothetically, you know, it's raining very hard and it's hot, and somebody like me, I at times may have a catheter in my chest and I can't get it wet. So I may have to, I may have an umbrella, but guess what? It's hot and I start sweating. The sweat picks up, you know, bacteria and viruses, gets in. Next thing you know, I'm in the hospital in the ICU because of sweating and having to be out there with the catheter. So the thing is that there's a lot that actually also goes into just getting to work to be able to survive, to keep yourself up.
Right. So I've had a few more layers of experience than I had 6 months ago or a year ago. With paratransit and me, it was always, oh crap, they sent me that vehicle. And that vehicle would make my pain that much worse. You know, because I'd be swaying and it's called a cutaway. So it's a bigger vehicle. And they put you all the way in the back as a wheelchair person. And then so you're in the back where everything's swaying all over everywhere. And even though you're secured and everything else, I tense my body because I try to prevent myself from getting thrown around. For me, paratransit typically, like I can take public transit and I can go 2 stops in a day. But if I do paratransit, it's an extra half an hour to an hour wait in between trips. It's an extra time so if I have a medical appointment and then I have to go to work, I can't do it typically, you know, with paratransit. More recently, because of the pandemic and because of the COVID stuff and my high risk status with all of that, even vaccinated, I still have a lot of concerns about it. I purchased a ramp van, a wheelchair accessible van, but it was the first time that I purchased such a device, you know, so we're talking, take a regular vehicle price and add $20,000 to $30,000 on that for the adaptations. So at the point when I was working, it's been a long learning curve for me with the whole van. And I've realized that I need an extra adaptation to that van that I don't have. So literally my in-home supportive worker was taking me to work, going back to his place, coming and picking me up and taking me home. But the workplace I was in was very like spread out. So one location was 3 or 4 miles from another location, and I might need to be in both locations, but I couldn't independently drive myself. I always had to schedule that ahead of time. And sometimes in the workplace, you can't schedule that. So with all of this, it was just chaotic. And I don't regret buying the van that I have because it does help me a lot. It makes it so that I can do 3 or 4 stops in a day and still function without being so freaking drained by the end of the day. You know, and when you're dealing with a driver that's paid by somebody else, you're also dealing with all of their workplace drama and their workplace issues and the struggles of life. And sometimes you get somebody who's really nice to engage with, and other times you get somebody who's up there sniveling and picking at their nose and you know, doing other stuff that is just, or even, you know, I've had some paratransit drivers that were slightly sexual harassment-ish, you know, and you know, they're like leering at me and looking at my cleavage, and you know, and I've got to let these people secure me in a chair, right? I have to let them secure my chair and help me get my belt on, which means sometimes they were standing behind me and trying to reach over me with that belt, and I literally would freak out because I have complex post-traumatic stress, you know, and you're in a fully dependent position in a wheelchair in many ways. And that complicates the access to the services. In my county, for like medical transport, which a lot of people get for like dialysis and other stuff, it's a different segue that's covered by our Medicaid in our state, that you can get a basically an ambulance service that comes and picks you up and takes you in. However, most of those services actually don't have ramp vans, or they have a rear entry for the vehicle, which is, and if you live in an urban space that has only parallel parking, I've had people in my building that go to dialysis have had that van, the ambulance, actually park perpendicular to the sidewalk so that they could board them onto it because they couldn't get on any other way. It's like you're in a catch-22, and all of these gaps kind of catch up over time, and it's that intersectional oppression that we all encounter. You know, it's one barrier is added to another, complicates another, and juggling those is just difficult.
Wow. Yeah, so that's some of what is dealt with as disabled workers.